In 23 years of working with clients, KPIs are one of the least talked about topics outside of consulting and coaching, one of the most misunderstood topics, and one of the most underutilized topics in almost every practice I've encountered. But first, why don't we talk about what are KPIs? KPIs are key performance indicators. It's something that you likely use on a day-to-day basis, but maybe just don't think about it. So if you walk out of a restaurant and you think, oh, what a fantastic restaurant, you might say, I'm going to give them a 5 out of 5. You walk out of another restaurant and think, well, the food was good, but the service, not so much. So maybe you give them a 3 out of 5. If you were actually, if you're working with a patient, you might monitor vitals or stats. I have clients of mine, oral surgeons, and they may monitor pulse ox rate. They may monitor a patient's blood pressure. They may monitor any number of different factors while they're working on a patient. Guess what? They're KPIs. Because in a sense, when you know they're wrong, you do something about them. So my name is Kevin Johnson. I'm the CEO of Leverage Consulting, also the creator of Leverage U, the online university. So when I've been working with clients, again, over the past 23 years, this is one of the ways that I work with clients to help diagnose where do we focus our time. It's the same thing you should be doing with your practice. And when we think about, and I'm going to talk about 5 different factors that you need to think about when utilizing KPIs in your practice. So when we think about, first off, KPIs, key performance indicators, what are we going to actually track? What are the key metrics? Because I could literally sit down and show you 100 different things you could track, but you don't want to track 100 different things. That sounds unpleasant, doesn't it? So think about what are the 5 things? Maybe you just pick 5 things that will make a difference to you and your practice, 5 things that you and your team can control, and 5 things that you can do something about. So when we pick these 5 things, you have to first think about and put some thought into what is really going to make a difference in your practice. So it could be production. If the chairs aren't full, because sometimes we can't really measure patient appointments, we could use that, but it's not really a great measurement because you could have one patient that generates the same production as 10 other patients. So the number of appointments isn't the greatest measure of your performance. It's really production, because production really shows how busy you are. It might be collections. You want to know how well we're collecting because you know every month you have bills that have to be paid. You have payroll, you have electric, you have rent, your mortgage payments, you have supply bills, you have all these different things you have to pay for every month. So we know we need a certain amount of collections. And it may be that collections, as an example, might be a short-term KPI that we monitor, we hyper-focus on. And that's what we have to think about this. Not that we discount all the other KPIs, but we're going to hyper-focus on these 5 because we know these are things that are not perfect. It's not where we want them to be. And it's something we're going to use and change. So when we think about these 5, again, production, collections, it could be your new patient flow. Maybe we're not getting enough new patients. It could be your overhead. You have to pick what your 5 are, because when you are thinking about how you're going to change your practice, how you're going to influence your outcome, when you think about the primary focus of less stress and more income, which is the focus of every engagement I have with a client, when you think about those 2 factors, what 5 things can you influence to achieve those 2 things? Less stress, more money. So it's super important for you to pick number 5, or pick your 5 and figure out what are the 5 things you can influence and change your practice for the better. So the next thing, the number 2 on the list, is how can I influence those KPIs? And that's really where we start getting super specific, because all too often we come in every day and we jump on that treadmill and we look for the problems and we solve the problems. We just deal with what's in front of us. We work in the next 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to we're working in the next 5 days, the next 10 days, where we're instead, or even maybe months. We might be thinking about what are we doing in the next 5 years. So when we really think about influencing these KPIs, how are we changing our scripting? How are we changing our systems, our schedule? How are we changing the responsibilities of team members? And this really brings us to another point of when you really get to some of the working with your team members, you may realize that some of them have no idea we're supposed to be working towards KPIs. You will start realizing that they are only working in the next 5 to 10 minutes. I find that's really one of the biggest holdbacks for so many practices, is that they're just working in the next 5 to 10 minute increments, as opposed to I'm working in the next couple of days, weeks, or months. So many of your team members have no idea that there are KPIs. And even with a client I've been working with here recently, their team knew the KPIs existed, and they got together frequently and they talked about them. But that's all they did. They talked about them. They didn't really dig in and talk about, how am I going to influence these things? And that's where you really start to get to leverage, because if one thing you take out of this video, take and write this down, go to key team members in your practice, and say, what are our top 5 KPIs and how do you influence them? Do it. I'd be shocked if you came back. In fact, I want to hear from you. If you came back and every team member knew what those 5 top KPIs are and how they can influence them. And it's not because I want to prove you wrong. It's because I've seen it for 23 years. Most times your team members have no idea what the KPIs are and then how they influence them. They may think, well, someone else does that. Someone else pulls it together. There's Oz behind the curtain that will actually, I don't know, they do stuff and magically the numbers get better, or they don't. So we don't want this to be by accident. We don't want it to be by chance. We want it to be deliberate success because of deliberate efforts. So when you think about how we influence it, then the next thing we have to do is number 3, we have to monitor it. Because the other thing that your team, you and your team need to know is, are we being successful? Are we making progress? And one of the dangers of working in the dental field is that we expect everything to happen now. We want everything to happen now. Why is that? Because that's how we work. When you schedule an appointment with a patient, 1 hour of chair time, you can accomplish so many different things. You see the fruits of your efforts. You see all the changes right before your eyes. The problem is that's not running a business. So when you're changing how you schedule, you're changing how you market your practice, you're changing roles and responsibilities for your team members. That is evolutionary. It happens over time. It's one of those things we have to stay consistent with. So in addition to picking your 5, in addition to talking about and figuring out how you can influence them. When I say you, I mean the whole team, how you can influence these KPIs. And then we have to, number 3, we have to monitor the progress, because we need to know whether we are making good progress over perfection. We need to know whether we're making good progress with the efforts that we're making, because number 1, if we do make good progress, we're validating we're doing the right thing. If we're not making enough good progress, then we need to figure out, is it that we need to tweak the system that we've implemented, or do we need to ramp up the intensity of what we're doing? Maybe more manpower, more people power, or maybe it's just that we need to ramp up the intensity, meaning we just need to do it with more fervor. We need to not hold back. We need not be timid when we do these things. We need to do it confidently. So it could be that we can make an adjustments there. If we're making no progress, then maybe we need to go back to the drawing board. Maybe we need to figure out a different way, a different path. But we won't know that until we monitor the progress. And that progress could be done daily, weekly, and or monthly. So number 4, which I've kind of alluded to already, is we need to reassess. So once you get those numbers and you can look at them and say, well, my target was this, but this is where we landed. If it's doing fantastic, then we get a round of applause for everyone on the team. We've done well. We're making good progress, because there isn't a person in your practice that doesn't have some level of influence on those KPIs. Even your sterilization tech can help you achieve your KPIs. And if you don't believe me, schedule a call. I'll explain it. When you think about the reassessment, okay, it can again be validation. We're doing the right thing. But if we're not, then we can reassess how we're going about implementing the system, how the intensity in which we're doing it, and we can reassess in that fashion. But the other way that you may reassess is, I alluded to this in the beginning, if your collections are off, maybe your accounts receivable has ballooned up big time. We are going to put a lot of intensity, a lot of effort into cleaning this up so we don't have this problem again in the future. So once it gets cleaned up, it gets within industry standards, benchmarks, it looks good, okay? Then maybe we ramp back we put them on more of a maintenance mode. We don't have all hands on deck to clean up the AR. So when we do that in that reassessment, it may be that we pluck AR from the top 5 that we're going to hyper focus on, put it in maintenance mode, and we're going to put something else in its place. That's also part of reassessment, because we should never be satisfied. We should always be reassessing where our goals are and where we are in our progress towards our goals. So number 5 is we have to be consistent. And I say this because, again, I go back to my statement about the world of dentistry. We tend to think of things in terms of appointments as opposed to evolution. We might think in terms of a day or an hour. I talked about this system one time, therefore I don't have to talk about it again. Well, guess what? That's not how we run a business. In leadership and management, you will remind people of things far more than you ever invent something new or present them something new. So you will remind them of these things frequently. And that's a reason for picking 5 KPIs. That's a reason for making sure everyone knows how they can influence their KPIs. It's a reason why we monitor the KPIs and reassess. And part of this consistency process is we may need to address this in team meetings, in one-on-one meetings, talk about it at a morning meeting. All these things make them know this is top of the list for you. This is top of the list for the team. So I'm going to give you a bonus, number 6. And you might think, as I'm talking about all these things, oh, I'm just going to stress out my team. They don't want to do this kind of stuff. Well, you know what? They do. You may think they don't. You know, it's interesting. I came from a household and an era when, and I think many of you can guess how old I am, but you may have come up in a generation or a household where you didn't get feedback. Or if you did get feedback, it's only to tell you you did it wrong. You may have gone through your program, your residency, and the only feedback you may have got was wrong, do it again. Or wrong, don't do it that way. And although that is feedback, it's not complete feedback. And in today's modern work environment, you can talk about the different generations, X, Ys, and Zs, and all the other ones. You can talk about all the different generations, but it is really the modern workforce. People want to know how they're doing. And there are different people out there, different speakers, different management gurus. We all think the same in terms of the modern workforce. They want to know how they're doing. They want to make a difference. They want to have a belonging to things. And when you implement something like this, you might see some squirming. Why do you see the squirming? Because it's different. And people process things differently. So it could be that they're squirming a little bit because they're visualizing, well, how do I do that tomorrow? How do I do that after lunch, after a meeting? That sounds really good, but I don't see Margaret doing that. People process things in different ways. But deep down inside, every one of your team members want to know how well they're doing. They want to know how the team is doing. They want to know whether we're making progress, because guess what? At some point, they're going to say, I want a raise, or we need to buy such and such. And those things don't appear out of thin air. We have to be able to produce the dentistry to collect the money to be able to afford the raises or be able to buy the equipment or whatever it may be. So when you think about, why should I care about KPIs? What's the big deal? You need to pick your 5, and you need to make sure your team, every team member, knows how they influence their own KPIs, the practice KPIs, so we can then reassess and make great progress and basically redesign the practice and level it up to a point to where we say, you know what, let's do it all over again. Let's change all the goals. Let's throw them all out the window and create new ones. Let's create new successes. Because ultimately, wouldn't it just be absolutely fantastic that you do such a great job with this? Because one of the struggles that I see with so many practices right now is finding good people. Could you imagine being that kind of practice where team members are stopping by your office and handing in their resume and say, when someone leaves, I want to take their place. When you're hiring, I'm available. I will make myself available. When you run a practice like this, you will attract people like that. So think about it. There are your big whys for why should you care about KPIs and how to implement them. If you like content like this, if you want more content like this, hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification button, because I am putting out a video for you every week.